The wind howled across the Montana plains like a creature possessed, driving snow sideways in sheets so thick that Sarah could barely see 5 feet ahead of her truck. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white, as the vehicle fishtailed on black ice for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The GPS had lost signal 20 miles back, and her cell phone showed no bars hadn't for the last hour. This was supposed to be a simple drive from Billings to her sister's ranch in Helena. She'd made the trip a dozen times before, but never in late November, and never when a freak blizzard decided to sweep down from Canada without proper warning. The weather report had called for light snow. This was anything but light. Her headlights caught something ahead, a structure of some kind. As she crept closer, squinting through the windscreen, she could make out a ranch house, sturdy and solid, with warm light glowing from its windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, whipped away instantly by the merciless wind. A barn stood nearby, and she could just barely make out the shapes of horses huddled against its leeward side. Sarah's truck coughed, sputtered, and died. No, 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 she pleaded, turning the key. The engine turned over weakly, then nothing. She tried again. Dead silence except for the shrieking wind. She sat there for a moment, considering her options. She had a heavy coat, but the temperature had to be well below 0 with the wind chill. Her emergency supplies were minimal. She hadn't expected to need them. The ranch house was maybe 50 yards away. She could make it. Sarah bundled herself as best she could, took a deep breath, and shoved open the door. The wind immediately tore it from her grasp, slamming it against its hinges. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She put her head down and pushed forward through snow that was already knee-deep in places. The distance to the porch seemed to stretch endlessly. Her face went numb within seconds, her eyes watering from the cold. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Finally, her boots hit the wooden steps. She climbed them and practically fell against the front door, pounding on it with fists she could no longer feel. The door opened so suddenly, she nearly fell inside. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into the face of a man who seemed carved from the same rugged landscape outside. He was tall, broad, shouldered, with dark hair showing threads of silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "Get into my cabin, it's freezing outside," he said, his voice rough but not unkind, already pulling her inside and shutting the door firmly against the wind. The warmth hit her immediately, so intense after the brutal cold that it almost hurt. She stood there dripping snow onto his hardwood floor, shivering so violently she couldn't speak. He didn't seem to expect conversation. Instead, he guided her to a chair near the fireplace, where flames crackled and danced, and disappeared into another room. He returned with blankets and a towel. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, matter of fact. "There's a bedroom through there, bathroom attached. Take a hot shower, warm up. I'll find you something dry to wear." Sarah nodded, her teeth chattering too hard for words. She made her way to the bedroom he'd indicated, her legs unsteady. The shower was glorious hot water sluicing over her frozen skin, bringing feeling back to her extremities in painful stages. She stood under the spray until she finally stopped shaking, until her fingers and toes had gone from white to pink to something approaching normal. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Flannel pajama pants, thick wool socks, a thermal shirt, and a heavy sweatshirt. All far too large for her, but warm and dry. She dressed quickly and ventured back out to the main room. Her host was stirring something on the stove in the kitchen area, which was separated from the living space only by a long counter. The cabin was open, plan, cozy but not cramped, with exposed beam ceilings and furniture that looked handmade. Bookshelves lined one wall, crammed with volumes that showed signs of being well read rather than just decorative. "Coffee or tea?" he asked without turning around. "Coffee, please." She managed, her voice hoarse. "Thank you. I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Mitchell." He turned then, and for the first time she saw something that might have been a smile ghost across his features. "Jake Thornton, and you're welcome. Sit down before you fall down." She sank into the chair by the fire again, and he brought her a mug of coffee so hot and strong it made her eyes water. She wrapped both hands around it, savoring the warmth. "Your truck's dead?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her with his own mug. "Yeah, just died on me out there. I was trying to get to my sister's place in Helena. The GPS quit, and I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere." Jake nodded. "You're about 40 miles off course. This storm came in faster than they predicted. Happens out here." He paused, studying her with those steady gray eyes. "You're lucky you found this place. Next house is 12 miles south." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold she'd just escaped. "I am lucky. Thank you for taking me in. Not much choice out here," he said, but there was something in his tone that suggested he might have done it anyway, choice or not. "Storm's supposed to last through tomorrow night, maybe into the next morning. Roads won't be passable until they get plowed, and that won't happen until the storm clears. So I'm stuck here." It wasn't a question. "We both are." He stood, moving back to the stove. "You hungry?" "I was just making stew. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty." "Starving, actually." She realized it was true. She'd skipped lunch, planning to grab something on the road. They ate in comfortable silence at first, Sarah too focused on the excellent stew, rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned perfectly, to make conversation. But as the warmth and food worked their magic, bringing her fully back to herself, she became more aware of her surroundings and her taciturn host. The cabin spoke of solitude chosen rather than imposed. Everything was orderly, clean, but there were no photographs, no personal mementos visible. Just the books, a well-used guitar propped in one corner, and a painting above the fireplace, a landscape of these same mountains under a summer sky, executed with real skill. "Did you paint that?" she asked, gesturing with her spoon. Jake glanced at it. "Yeah, few years back." "It's beautiful. You're talented." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. "Just something to do with my hands." Sarah sensed a story there, layers beneath the surface, but she didn't push. "Instead," she said, "I'm guessing you don't get many unexpected visitors." "You'd be guessing right." He collected their empty bowls, carried them to the sink. "I like it that way, generally. I promise to be the least intrusive stranded motorist you've ever rescued." That earned her an actual smile, small but genuine. "So far, you're the only one, so the bar's not high." As the evening wore on, they fell into an easier rhythm. Jake seemed to relax incrementally, his answers growing longer, his questions more personal, but never intrusive. Sarah learned that he'd been a doctor once, in Seattle, before burning out on the bureaucracy and heartbreak of emergency medicine. He'd inherited this ranch from an uncle 5 years ago and never looked back. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, that's too personal." But Jake didn't seem offended. He considered the question seriously. "Lonely and alone aren't the same thing. I spent years surrounded by people and felt lonelier than I ever do here." He paused, staring into the fire. "Out here, the silence is honest. Nobody wants anything from me. Nobody needs me to be anything I'm not." Sarah understood that more than she wanted to admit. She'd spent the last 3 years in a relationship that had drained her dry, constantly shaping herself to fit someone else's expectations, until she wasn't sure who she was anymore. She'd ended it 6 months ago, and this trip to her sister's was supposed to be about finding herself again. "That makes sense," she said quietly, "more than you might think." He looked at her then, really looked, and she had the strange sensation of being seen in a way she hadn't been in years. Not assessed or judged, just recognized. The wind rattled the windows, reminding them of the storm still raging outside, but inside the cabin, Sarah felt safer than she had in months. She told him about her work as a landscape architect, her love of hiking and photography, her complicated relationship with her family. He listened without the performative attention she was used to from people who were just waiting for their turn to talk. He actually listened, asked thoughtful questions, remembered details from earlier in her stories. In turn, she learned about his horses, 3 of them, retired rescue animals he'd taken in because nobody else would. About his attempts at writing, pages of unfinished novels he claimed weren't any good, but wouldn't let her read to judge for herself. About his morning routine of coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains, regardless of the weather. "That sounds perfect," Sarah said, meaning it. "It is," Jake agreed, "most days." "What about the other days?" He was quiet for a long moment. "The other days, I remember why I came out here in the first place. The things I saw, the people I couldn't save, the ways I failed." His voice remained steady, but she could hear the old pain beneath it. "And I wonder if I'm healing or just hiding." Sarah reached across the space between their chairs and touched his hand. It was an impulse, unplanned, but it felt right. "Maybe it's both. Maybe that's okay." His fingers curled around hers, warm and solid. They sat like that, hands joined, watching the fire, until the clock on the mantel chimed 10 and Sarah realized she'd been yawning for the past hour. "You should get some sleep," Jake said, releasing her hand with what seemed like reluctance. "Take the bedroom. I'll be fine out here on the couch." "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will. It's warmer in there, and you've been through hell today." No arguments. Sarah was too tired to fight him on it. She said good night and retreated to the bedroom, where she fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the sound of the storm and the strange comfort of not being alone. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the previous day came flooding back. She checked her phone, still no signal, but it was nearly 9 in the morning. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept so late or so deeply. When she emerged, Jake was plating breakfast, and the sight stopped her in her tracks. He was wearing worn jeans and a thermal shirt that showed off a lean, strong build, his hair damp from a shower. He looked younger in the morning light, less haunted. "Morning," he said, glancing up. "Storm's passed, but the roads are buried. I'll need to check on the horses, make sure they weathered it okay. You're welcome to come if you want, or stay inside where it's warm." "I'll come," Sarah said immediately. "I'd like to meet them." After breakfast, they bundled up and ventured outside. The world had been transformed into something alien, and beautiful snow piled in drifts taller than Sarah's head. Icicles hanging from the barn eaves like crystal chandeliers. The sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The horses whinnied when Jake entered the barn, clearly happy to see him. He introduced Sarah to each one. Dakota, a gray mare with gentle eyes, Thunder, a massive black gelding with a white blaze, and Willow, a smaller chestnut with a skittish disposition who warmed to Sarah immediately. "She likes you," Jake said, sounding surprised. "She doesn't usually take to strangers." Sarah stroked Willow's nose, feeling absurdly pleased. Maybe she knows a fellow nervous creature when she sees one. She helped Jake feed and water the horses, muck out the stalls, check for any injuries or signs of distress. He worked with an easy competence that spoke of years of practice, and she found herself enjoying the simple physicality of the labor, the way they fell into sync without needing to talk. Back in the cabin, they made lunch together, and Sarah realized she was reluctant for this interlude to end. In less than 24 hours, this man and this place had worked their way under her skin. The afternoon unfolded lazily. Jake worked on saddle repairs while Sarah curled up with a book from his shelves. They talked occasionally, but the silence between words was comfortable, companionable. As evening approached, Jake taught her to play chess, and she beat him on her third game, which made him laugh with genuine delight. Beginner's luck, he claimed, superior strategy, she countered. They made dinner together, pasta with a sauce Jake threw together from canned tomatoes and fresh herbs he grew in pots by the window. They opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for no particular occasion, and the conversation deepened, grew more personal, touched on dreams and regrets and hopes they'd almost forgotten they had. Sarah found herself talking about the relationship she'd left, the ways she'd diminished herself, the person she was trying to remember how to be. Jake listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything, just bearing witness to her story. "You know what I think," he said finally. "I think you're exactly who you're supposed to be, right now, in this moment. Not who you were, not who you'll be, just this." Something in her chest loosened, a knot she hadn't known was there. "That's very zen of you, Cowboy. I have my moments." He paused, then, "For what it's worth, I like who you are right now." The air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Sarah's heart beat faster. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be finding herself, not falling for a lonely man in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. But maybe finding herself included being brave enough to reach for something real. She stood, crossed the space between them, and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Jake went still with surprise. Then his hand came up to cup her face, gentle and sure, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her ache. It was a kiss of greeting and recognition, of two people who'd been alone too long finding each other in the storm. When they pulled apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I wasn't expecting this," he said quietly. "Neither was I," Sarah admitted. "Is that okay?" "Yeah," he said, and kissed her again. "Yeah, it's more than okay." They stayed up late, talking and kissing like teenagers, learning the geography of each other's hands and mouths, moving slowly because they both sensed this was important, worth savoring. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they fell asleep in Jake's bed, wrapped around each other, the rest of the world far away. The next 2 days passed in a blur of intimacy and discovery. The roads remained impassable, and neither of them minded. They cooked together, cared for the horses together, made love in the afternoon with snow falling softly outside the windows. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing the stories of their lives, finding unexpected resonances and complementary wounds. Sarah learned that Jake took his coffee black but his tea with honey, that he had a scar on his ribs from a skiing accident when he was 12, that he could play guitar well enough to make her cry when he sang old folk songs in his rough, untrained voice, that he was funny when he let himself be, kind in ways both large and small, damaged but not broken. Jake learned that Sarah talked in her sleep, that she made the best scrambled eggs he'd ever tasted, that she saw patterns and beauty in everything around her, always thinking like the landscape. Architect she was, imagining how spaces could be shaped to bring peace, that she was braver than she gave herself credit for, stronger than she knew, looking for a place to belong. On the fourth morning, Sarah woke to the sound of engines. Through the window, she could see a snowplow making its way down the road, clearing a path to civilization. "The roads are opening," she said, and felt her heart sink. Jake, still beside her in bed, pulled her closer. "I know." They lay there in silence, both thinking the same thing neither wanted to say. This had to end. Sarah had a life waiting, a job, a sister expecting her. Jake had chosen this solitude for reasons that hadn't magically disappeared. What they'd found here existed outside of time, outside of the real world with its obligations and complications. "What happens now?" Sarah finally asked. Jake was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't think I'd ever want anyone to stay, but I want you to stay." Sarah turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope he was trying not to show. "I want to stay too, but I don't know how to do this. Long distance, when you're out here and I'm in Portland. Trying to build something when we're both still figuring out who we are." "Maybe we figure it out together," Jake said. "Maybe you come back when you can. Maybe I come to the city sometimes, even though it terrifies me. Maybe we take it slow and see what grows." It wasn't a perfect solution. It didn't solve all the problems or guarantee anything. But it was honest, and it was brave, and it was more than Sarah had dared to hope for. "Okay," she said. "Yes, let's try." Jake called a local mechanic who came out and got Sarah's truck running. Just a frozen fuel line, easily remedied. They packed her things together, moving slowly, stealing kisses between tasks. At her truck, they stood in the cold, neither wanting to let go. "Drive safe," Jake said. "Text me when you get to your sister's when you get home. Call me whenever you want. I'm not good at this, but I want to be, for you." "I'm not good at it either," Sarah said. "We'll learn together." She kissed him one more time, then made herself get in the truck and start the engine. As she drove away, watching him in the rear, you mirror standing there in the snow with his hand raised in farewell. She felt tears on her cheeks. But she was smiling too. 3 months later, Sarah stood on Jake's porch again, this time in spring. The mountains were green and gold, wildflowers blooming in impossible profusion. Jake opened the door before she could knock, like he'd been watching for her, and swept her into his arms. "Welcome home," he said, and standing there in his embrace, with the endless Montana sky above them and all the time in the world ahead, Sarah realized something had changed. Not everything. They both still had their demons, their doubts, their separate lives to navigate. But they'd found a way forward together, one visit at a time, one phone call, one leap of faith after another. The lonely cowboy had invited her into his cabin to escape the cold, and in doing so, had opened a door neither of them could close. And Sarah, who'd been lost in a storm, had found herself in the warmth of his fire, in the steadiness of his presence, in the courage it took to choose love even when it was complicated and uncertain. Sometimes being found was as simple as being willing to knock on a stranger's door. Sometimes home was a person rather than a place. And sometimes the best things in life began with a simple invitation. "Get into my cabin, it's freezing outside." But everything that mattered happened when you decided to stay.